November 23, 1939. Shoeburyness mudflats on the Thames Estuary. The brass buttons had been cut from his uniform, his wristwatch left with the shore party, even the steel eyelets removed from his boots. Commander John Ouvry edged toward the dark cylindrical object half sunk in the mud with nothing metallic on his person, carrying only non-magnetic brass instruments and the knowledge that a single error could vaporize him and his team instantly. The mine, dropped from a German aircraft the night before, was their first direct encounter with what would later be called Hitler's secret weapon. What Ouvry could not foresee was that the careful moves he made over the next hour would set off a technological chess game that would lay bare the most dangerous weaknesses of the Third Reich's war machine. The object before him embodied 3 years of German certainty and scientific arrogance, a weapon they believed would starve Britain into submission without firing a single shot. German naval intelligence had assured the Kriegsmarine that their magnetic mines were undetectable, immune to sweeping, and would take the British years to understand, let alone counter. Within 6 weeks, though, every major Allied warship would carry fitted countermeasures. Within 5 months, more than 3,000 Allied vessels would become effectively invisible to German magnetic mines, and the speed of that change would shock German naval command for the remainder of the war. The first hints of the revelation appeared on September 3, 1939, only hours after Britain declared war on Germany. Submarines, U-boats U-13, U-14, and U-17, slipped their pens carrying cargo more valuable than torpedoes. TMB magnetic mines, the device German scientists promised would transform naval warfare. Unlike contact mines that required a ship to strike them, these devices sensed the magnetic signature of a steel hull passing overhead. The mines detonated beneath the keel, transmitting an immense force through nearly incompressible water that could break a ship's back. German engineers had reasoned that a steel hull concentrated the Earth's magnetic field and so produced a distinctive signature able to trigger the mine from depths of up to 50 feet, a weapon elegant in its simplicity and catastrophic in result. Captain Lieutenant Heinrich Lieber, commanding U-38, later wrote in a war diary recovered after Germany's surrender, "We carry the weapon that will bring England to its knees. No minesweeper can find them. No method exists to defeat them." His boast mirrored the Kriegsmarine's widespread conviction in their technological edge. By mid-September, unexplained explosions began to strike vessels in waters that had been swept clear of conventional mines. The steamship Magdeburg vanished in a massive blast on September 10th, followed 6 days later by the city of Paris. Unlike ships struck by contact mines, which showed localized hull damage at the point of impact, these victims suffered catastrophic structural failure. Survivors testified that their vessels were lifted and split by an enormous upward force. During October and November 1939, Britain lost in excess of 200,000 tons of shipping to German mines. The Admiralty was forced to close ports, reroute convoys, and stand helpless as ships detonated in waters deemed safe. Each incident paralyzed lanes for days while minesweepers dragged cables through seas that contained no conventional moored mines. At HMS Vernon, the Royal Navy's mine warfare school in Portsmouth, scientists and officers worked day and night to decipher the new threat. They understood magnetic mines in theory. Britain had experimented with crude versions in 1918, but the German instruments were demonstrably far more advanced. The Royal Navy examined more than 200 mines in October and November 1939, all of them contact types, and none explained the mysterious sinkings. The breakthrough, ironically, came because of rivalry between branches of the German military. The Luftwaffe, eager to claim credit for strangling British shipping, began to deploy its own magnetic mines by parachute. The Luftmine A and Luftmine B, weighing up to 1,000 kilograms and descending slowly beneath silk canopies. On the night of November 22, 1939, a Heinkel H-59 float plane approached the Thames Estuary at low altitude. British anti-aircraft crews spotted the aircraft and opened fire. The startled pilot released his payload prematurely and fled. One mine came to rest on the mudflats at Shoeburyness during low tide. Army sentries from the nearby garrison noticed the parachute draped across the mud and alerted naval intelligence immediately. Commander John Ouvry, then a lieutenant commander and render mines safe officer at HMS Vernon, was already investigating reports of German parachute mines in the area, and upon hearing of the intact weapon, he grasped at once the significance of the find. This, he realized, was the secret instrument devastating British shipping, but approaching it would demand extreme courage and painstaking preparation. The mine lay 500 yards from shore, partly buried in mud that the next high tide would soon cover. Ouvry gathered his small team, Lieutenant Commander Roger Lewis, Chief Petty Officer Charles Baldwin, and able seaman Alexander Verncombe. Each man carefully stripped away anything that might attract the mine's magnetic sensors. Belt buckles, keys, coins, watches, even the tiny metal eyelets from their boots were removed. Their equipment consisted solely of tools specially crafted from non-magnetic brass. As Ouvry inched closer to the mine, he would later recall, "Every step could have been my last. We knew how clever the Germans were. There could be anti-handling devices, timers, or hidden booby traps. Yet they had to uncover how it functioned, because the outcome of the entire naval war might depend on their findings." The mine measured about 8 feet in length and 2 feet in diameter, made of aluminium to avoid magnetic detection by Allied sweepers. Working with extreme caution and precision, Ouvry began dismantling the fuse assembly, while Lewis documented each stage from a safer distance. If it exploded, at least the next team would know what had gone wrong. After an hour of painstaking effort, Ouvry finally succeeded in removing the magnetic firing mechanism intact. The recovered fuse was immediately sent to physicist Albert B. Wood in Portsmouth. Assisted by W.F.B. Shaw and H.W. Kelly, Wood disassembled it the following day and identified the crucial component, an internal induction magnetometer. The secret was out, a magnetic needle capable of detecting even slight variations in the surrounding magnetic field. When a steel ship passed overhead, the needle shifted, closing an electrical circuit that triggered roughly 300 kilograms of explosive. Winston Churchill, serving then as First Lord of the Admiralty, received the news at once. On December 19, 1939, King George VI personally presented Ouvry with the Distinguished Service Order at HMS Vernon. Yet the true reward wasn't the medal, but the newfound understanding of how to counter the weapon. The solution, as it turned out, came from an unexpected mind. Commander Charles Goodave, a Canadian chemist serving in the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, coined the term degaussing, derived from the Gauss, the unit of magnetic field strength named after mathematician Carl Friedrich Gauss. Goodave reasoned that if ships naturally produced magnetic fields, those same fields could also be neutralized. The concept was simple but ingenious. A steel hull intensified Earth's magnetic field, with the North Pole pointing downward in the northern hemisphere. By winding electrical cables around a ship and running current through them, it was possible to generate an opposing magnetic field that canceled out the vessel's own signature, rendering it invisible to magnetic mines. At first, large warships were fitted with permanent copper degaussing coils connected to their electrical systems. HMS Ark Royal, one of Britain's most valuable aircraft carriers, was among the first to receive this modification. However, such installations were costly and required electrical capacity that smaller ships simply didn't have. Goodave soon devised a faster and more practical method called wiping. In this process, a cable carrying electric current was drawn up and down a ship's hull, temporarily neutralizing its magnetic field. The treatment took only a few hours and protected the vessel for several months before needing renewal. It was rough but highly effective, and could be done at almost any port with basic equipment. The scale of implementation was astonishing. In the 4 days leading up to the Dunkirk evacuation in May 1940, over 400 ships underwent degaussing. Permanent stations were set up at every major British harbor, operating around the clock to process warships, merchantmen, and even fishing boats, any vessel with a steel hull. By January 1940, just 6 weeks after Ouvry's daring operation, The first Wellington bomber equipped with a magnetic mine-sweeping ring successfully neutralized a German mine on January 8th. The aircraft carried a 48-foot aluminium ring charged with electrical current, producing a massive magnetic field capable of triggering mines from a safe height. The Germans were taken aback by the sheer speed of Britain's response. In a February 1940 report, Korvettenkapitän Friedrich Ruge, head of German mine development, admitted, "The British have implemented countermeasures with impossible speed. Our 3-year advantage has vanished in 3 months. Every estimate of enemy capability has failed." German confidence in their technological superiority began to crumble. In March 1940, aerial reconnaissance captured clear images of degaussing cables wrapped around British ships at Scapa Flow. A photograph of the ocean liner Queen Mary in New York Harbor revealed her own coil, proving that the technology had already been shared with the Americans, long before they entered the conflict. By August 1940, Winston Churchill confidently told Parliament that the magnetic mine threat had been effectively mastered. In just 5 months, the 2 degaussing methods had protected 1,000 ships through wiping and equipped another 2,000 with permanent cables. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German U-boat fleet, vented his frustration in his war diary. In May 1940, he wrote bitterly, "I doubt whether men have ever been forced to rely on such a useless weapon," referring to magnetic torpedoes that operated on the same principle as the mines. The magnetic detonators that were supposed to guarantee hits were now failing against degaussed ships. The psychological toll on German naval crews was immense. Captain Lieutenant Fritz Julius Lemp of U-30, which had laid some of the first magnetic mines, confided to his brother, "Our secret weapon is secret no more." The British seemed to adapt faster than Germany could invent. Every technical advantage the Reich achieved proved short-lived and fleeting. HMS Belfast, one of the Royal Navy's newest cruisers, had fallen victim to a magnetic mine on November 21, 1939. A weapon laid by U-21 on November 4th. The explosion broke her back, wrecked her engines and boilers, and wounded 46 crewmen. She remained under repair for almost 3 years. Yet Belfast was among the final major warships to be crippled by German magnetic mines. The preserved mine now displayed aboard her stands as a symbol of both vulnerability and triumph. Germany's attempts to answer the British countermeasures quickly exposed the limits of its industrial and scientific strength. Engineers created pressure mines that detected the movement of surrounding water and acoustic mines that responded to the sound of engines. But each new design was neutralized just as rapidly. The British countered with noisemakers to set off acoustic mines prematurely and adjusted vessel speeds to confuse pressure sensors. Yet what hurt Germany most wasn't the technical setback, but the revelation of its industrial weakness. Although German planners aimed to produce 50,000 magnetic mines, by the spring of 1940 they had built barely 1,500. These weapons depended on complex magnetic sensors, and Germany lacked the nickel and copper reserves necessary for mass production. Meanwhile, Britain showcased its immense industrial capacity, building thousands of degaussing stations, millions of feet of copper cabling, and equipping an entire fleet with defenses in mere months. The still neutral United States began degaussing its own merchant vessels and shared intelligence with the British Admiralty. German scientists scrambled to adapt, designing mines that delayed arming until several ships had passed, in an effort to outsmart the regular sweeping operations. They added counters so that a mine might detonate only after the 3rd or 5th vessel. But every new idea demanded greater complexity, more scarce materials, and increasingly intricate production. By late 1940, German naval intelligence intercepted British messages in which officers discussed their countermeasures with casual assurance. Ship captains now mentioned degaussing schedules as routinely as engine maintenance. The weapon once expected to strangle Britain without risking German lives had become little more than a nuisance. Its failure echoed throughout German strategic planning. Operation Sea Lion, the proposed invasion of Britain, had depended on magnetic mines to secure the landing zones from Royal Navy interference. Without them, the slow invasion barges would have been easy prey for British warships, and so the mines' defeat helped ensure the operation's indefinite delay. German submarine commanders began refusing to carry mines at all, preferring to use their limited torpedo storage for proven weapons. U-boat commander Herbert Schulze complained, "Why waste space on devices the enemy has already overcome? Every mine aboard is a torpedo we cannot fire at a real target." The technological loss exposed far deeper weaknesses. Germany's famed scientific supremacy proved hollow when confronted with British ingenuity and American manufacturing power. The same nation that could design precision magnetic sensors could not produce them in the quantities required. The regime that promised technological miracles delivered weapons that worked perfectly in theory, but failed against determined opposition. The double L sweep, devised by Charles Gudeve, used two trailing cables towed behind non-magnetic ships. Passing electric current between them created a magnetic field capable of clearing 10 acres of seabed at once. By March 1940, the technique had eliminated 74 mines, and by June, the total exceeded 300. The sweeping operations revealed both the massive scale of German mine-laying and its ultimate futility. British minesweepers cleared channels with painstaking precision, often uncovering dozens of intricate mines that had cost Germany immense effort and resources to create. Each recovered example offered new insight into enemy capabilities and production limits. American observers, still officially neutral yet increasingly supportive, watched closely. Captain Jerry Land of the U.S. Maritime Commission informed Washington that the U.S. Navy had launched its own degaussing initiative, establishing facilities at key ports. American shipyards began installing degaussing systems on new vessels, and the Liberty ships that would later sustain Allied armies were designed with built-in coils from the start. By the time the United States entered the war, nearly its entire merchant fleet was protected. German efforts to keep their mines effective grew ever more desperate. Engineers introduced combination mines requiring both magnetic and acoustic signatures to explode. Yet these designs were so complicated that they often failed altogether. German sailors joked bitterly that their mines were more dangerous to handle than to the enemy. The mine warfare saga revealed more than a contest of technology. It laid bare the deeper flaws at the heart of Nazi ideology itself. The regime that boasted of German racial and intellectual supremacy watched, powerless, as British scientists, including Jewish refugees from Germany, unraveled their secret weapons within weeks. The nation that had promised technological miracles through so-called Aryan genius found itself outclassed by democratic cooperation and industrial power. Dr. Rudolf Kuhnhold, who had once worked on German radar development, learned through neutral channels how swiftly the Allies had neutralized the magnetic mines. In his private notes he wrote, "The failure of the mine exposes our structural weakness. We labor in isolation while they work together. We hoard secrets, they exchange knowledge. We promise wonders, they achieve results." By the middle of 1941, magnetic mines had become so ineffective that Germany abandoned them as a main naval weapon. Resources were shifted toward U-boat production and conventional torpedoes. The weapon once envisioned to win the war without risking German lives had devoured immense effort and materials for negligible gain. In 1942 alone, German submarines laid only 96 mines that caused ship losses, compared with the hundreds destroyed by torpedoes. The elaborate mine-laying missions, requiring precise navigation in hostile waters and exposing U-boats to detection, had turned into futile ventures. Commanders came to favor direct torpedo attacks, where they could at least verify their results. The psychological blow to German naval officers lingered for the rest of the war. Kapitän zur See Hermann von Fischl, captured in 1943, told his interrogators, "When we saw how quickly you defeated the magnetic mine, we knew the war was lost. If you could neutralize our greatest secret weapon in weeks, what chance did we ever have?" Encouraged by their victory, British scientific teams tackled every new German weapon with growing confidence. When acoustic mines emerged, they produced noise-making decoys within months. When pressure mines appeared in 1943, they adjusted ship speeds and routes to render them useless. Every German innovation met a swift Allied countermeasure. The degaussing program's success carried far-reaching strategic significance beyond mine defense. It proved how effective Allied scientific cooperation could be, with British, American, and Canadian researchers sharing discoveries freely. It displayed the scale of Allied industry, with thousands of installations running non-stop, and highlighted intelligence strength as captured German weapons were analyzed and countered within days. German intelligence efforts to uncover Allied countermeasures continually fell short. Spies managed to report on degaussing activities but could never supply the technical data. Reconnaissance aircraft photographed the coils wrapped around ships, but revealed nothing about their electrical properties. U-boat captains saw degaussed vessels glide unharmed through minefields but had no idea how the system worked. The contrast with Germany's own secrecy could not have been clearer. While Nazi authorities fragmented research and restricted cooperation, the Allies encouraged open scientific exchange. British degaussing methods were even printed in technical bulletins accessible to any Allied engineer. American refinements were immediately shared across the Atlantic, and Canadian contributions were applied fleet-wide. By 1943, degaussing had become so ordinary that it rarely warranted mention in reports. Ships underwent the process on schedule, just as they refueled or loaded supplies. What had seemed almost miraculous in 1940 was now simple routine. German mines still posed dangers, but they were reduced to manageable risks, not decisive weapons. The industrial scale of Allied operations overwhelmed German capacity. Britain alone maintained more than 100 permanent degaussing stations, each capable of treating several ships per day. Thousands of trained technicians carried out the work, while miles of copper cable were manufactured every month. The organizational achievement rivaled the scientific accomplishment. German naval designers attempted to build non-magnetic vessels from wood and light metals, but these ships proved slow, fragile, and prohibitively costly. The few completed examples confirmed that eliminating magnetism was far less practical than neutralizing it. German innovation was strangled by shortages of materials, a limitation the Allies never faced. The psychological effects of the mine war reached the German home front as well. Propaganda had promised that magnetic mines would starve Britain into surrender. Yet when British shipping continued largely unhindered, confidence in Germany's technical superiority began to crumble. Workers in mine factories started to question why they were producing weapons the enemy had already beaten. Allied psychological warfare took full advantage of this disillusionment. BBC broadcasts boasted of degaussing victories, often overstating their success to sap German morale. Leaflets scattered over naval bases displayed photos of Allied ships passing safely through minefields, a taunting reminder that the so-called secret weapon had lost its power. The message was unmistakable. Germany's hidden weapons no longer held any secrets from the Allies. The vast scientific mobilization that the magnetic mine crisis had provoked would go on to give the Allies enduring superiority for the rest of the war. Research teams that had first been assembled to fight the mine threat later turned their attention to radar, sonar, and code breaking. The scientists who learned to collaborate across national lines continued working together for the rest of the war. The urgent response to the magnetic mine had created patterns of scientific cooperation that would endure long afterward. German researchers who had designed the magnetic mine watched its downfall with a mix of professional curiosity and personal disappointment. Dr. Helmut Walter, one of its contributors, later reflected, "We built an elegant weapon undone by a simple countermeasure. Our failure was not one of technology, but of system." He admitted that while the Germans worked in isolation, their enemies thrived through teamwork. The economic cost of the failed mine campaign placed a heavy strain on Germany's limited resources. Each advanced mine cost roughly 3,000 Reichsmarks to produce, about 3 months' wages for a skilled laborer, and thousands were manufactured and deployed. Yet the return was negative. The expense and effort far outweighed the actual damage inflicted on Allied shipping. Allied convoys, once immobilized by fear of magnetic mines, sailed again with confidence once degaussing became common practice. Merchant seamen who had refused to risk mined waters returned to duty, assured that their vessels were now protected. Insurance premiums, which had soared during the crisis, fell rapidly as the success of degaussing became evident. Germany's attempt to wage economic warfare through mines had completely backfired. The technological duel between both sides continued, but the advantage had shifted decisively to the Allies. When Germany introduced the Oyster pressure mine in June 1944, during the Normandy invasion, hoping to disrupt Allied supply lines, the effort failed almost instantly. Allied ships had already adapted, adjusting speeds and routes in anticipation of the new device. By 1944, U-boat commanders considered mine-laying missions a form of punishment. The weapons they carried grew increasingly sophisticated yet progressively ineffective. War diaries from this period reflected not determination, but resignation. Captains recorded the laying of mines with little hope of success, fulfilling orders that had lost all meaning. The intelligence gained from captured German mines offered insights that extended far beyond naval warfare. Analysts studying their components learned about German production methods, material shortages, and quality control issues. Serial numbers on internal parts allowed Allied intelligence to trace output levels and identify factory origins. The mines became unintentional blueprints revealing the limits of German industry. Britain's confidence in its scientific edge, strengthened by the magnetic mine victory, influenced strategic thinking for the rest of the war. When the Germans introduced V-weapons, acoustic torpedoes, and jet aircraft, Allied leaders remained convinced that countermeasures could be devised. The swift defeat of the magnetic mine had proven that no so-called secret weapon was invincible. The administrative frameworks created to manage degaussing operations soon served as models for other wartime programs. The coordination established among military, industrial, and scientific sectors during the mine emergency was replicated in radar research, convoy protection, and invasion logistics. The crisis had built a durable foundation for large-scale wartime innovation. In the Pacific, American forces applied the same lessons learned from the European mine war. Japanese magnetic mines, based on German technology, were swiftly neutralized using the degaussing techniques perfected in the Atlantic. The transfer of knowledge was seamless, and the counteraction immediate. What had once taken months to develop against Germany now took only days against Japan. Post-war German assessments of the mine's failure were strikingly candid. Admiral Dönitz wrote in his memoirs, "We placed too much faith in our technical edge without considering the enemy's ingenuity. The magnetic mine should have been one weapon among many, not a miracle tool. Our failure was conceptual, not mechanical." Karl Kaufmann, Gauleiter of Hamburg, who had overseen mine production, echoed that sentiment after the war. "We watched thousands of workers building weapons that the enemy had already overcome. The Nazi promise of unstoppable wonder weapons had been exposed as illusion." The collapse of the magnetic mine myth marked the first real crack in the belief in German superiority. Many who fought the mine war carried its lessons into the post-war world. British scientists who had pioneered degaussing became leaders in post-war technology and engineering. American naval officers who had implemented countermeasures helped shape Cold War naval doctrine. The crisis of the magnetic mine had created expertise that far outlived its original purpose. The preserved German magnetic mine displayed aboard HMS Belfast in London remains a lasting monument to multiple victories. It stands for Ouvry's courage in diffusing an unknown threat, for British ingenuity in devising countermeasures, and for Allied industrial power in carrying them out. Most of all, it symbolizes the collapse of Nazi claims of racial and technological supremacy. When school groups visit Belfast, they often ask why such a simple-looking object caused so much terror. The guides explain that its true strength was never in its explosive charge, but in the fear it spread. For a brief moment, it made the ocean seem impassable and Britain perilously exposed. Its swift defeat proved that no secret weapon could triumph over determination, cooperation, and industrial strength. The speed of the Allied reaction to the magnetic mine astonished not only Germany, but also neutral observers across the world. Swedish naval attaché Eric F. Klint reported to Stockholm, "In 10 weeks, the British have neutralized a weapon system that Germany spent 3 years creating." He added that this achievement showed not merely technical brilliance, but also an organizational superiority likely to decide the war's outcome. Swiss intelligence, which monitored both camps, also remarked on the contrast between their scientific methods. Their reports described German researchers confined by secrecy, forbidden from discussing difficulties or sharing discoveries. In contrast, Allied scientists convened freely, exchanged findings, and even published their research. This openness explained the stark difference in results. The story of the magnetic mine exposed fundamental contrasts in how each side waged war. Germany pursued victory through secret, decisive technological breakthroughs. The Allies focused on methodical responses, industrial scalability, and collaboration. The German model produced striking innovations that collapsed when confronted by countermeasures. The Allied model generated steady, cumulative gains that ultimately ensured victory. Modern naval historians regard the magnetic mine crisis as a turning point, not in the war's outcome itself, but in its nature. The rapid Allied response proved that the conflict would be won not by secret inventions or tactical genius, but through mass production, adaptability, and science. Germany could create, but it could not sustain. The Allies could learn, adapt, and eventually overpower. The human side of the magnetic mine's failure rippled through the ranks of the Kriegsmarine. Young officers who had joined the Navy, convinced of German technological supremacy, saw that faith collapse. Sailors who had been told they served in the most advanced fleet in the world realized they were outbuilt and outmatched. The psychological blow came before and amplified the military defeats that followed. For Allied sailors, once terrified of unseen mines that could obliterate their ships without warning, the success of degaussing restored confidence. The phrase, "ships being wiped," became a comforting assurance in perilous waters. Merchant mariners who had once refused dangerous routes returned to their posts, confident that science now protected them. The paralyzing fear that had halted shipping gave way to calm procedure and trained caution. The flow of technology from military to civilian life began even before the war ended. Degaussing methods were soon adapted to shield industrial machinery from magnetic disruption. The precise field measurement techniques first developed for mine detection improved navigation systems. The scientists who had raced to counter Germany's mines later applied that same knowledge to peaceful innovations. The institutional lessons from the magnetic mine ordeal shaped Allied planning for the invasion of Europe. Expecting Germany to guard its beaches with advanced mines, the Allies prepared accordingly. Specialized mine-sweeping units were formed, trained, and equipped, while the entire invasion fleet was thoroughly degaussed. When German minefields were encountered, they were swiftly cleared using techniques refined back in 1940. Intelligence agencies on both sides dissected the magnetic mine episode for insights into technical intelligence and countermeasure development. Britain's swift success in analyzing and neutralizing the weapon became a model study in effective technical intelligence. Germany's inability to foresee or counter Allied innovation became a warning against overconfidence in secret technology. By the end of the war, magnetic mines, once hailed as revolutionary, had faded into near irrelevance in naval warfare. Allied vessels were now routinely degaussed, mine-sweeping methods refined, and detection devices made increasingly advanced. German mines continued to inflict occasional damage, yet by this stage they were seen as tactical nuisances rather than true strategic dangers. The weapon that had once promised to revolutionize naval warfare had been reduced to a mere historical footnote. The preserved technical records from both sides reveal a striking contrast in philosophy. German documents focus on secrecy, compartmentalization, and intricate engineering. Allied records, by contrast, emphasize collaboration, standardization, and large-scale production. The German method produced ingenious but ultimately futile designs. The Allied method delivered results that worked. To this day, universities in Britain and the United States use the magnetic mine episode as a classic example of crisis management and applied problem-solving. Business schools examine the organizational response. Engineering faculty study the technical innovations, and military academies analyze the broader strategic lessons. The teachings derived from this episode extend far beyond its wartime origins. Those who took part in the magnetic mine crisis carried its lessons throughout their lives. Commander John Ouvry, who had risked his life defusing the very first mine, later reflected, "We faced a weapon that seemed unbeatable until we understood it. Once we understood, it became just another problem to solve." He believed the Germans never realized that secrecy was far weaker than knowledge openly shared. Charles Goodeve, the scientist behind degaussing, went on to play a major role in post-war research and development. He often told his colleagues, "The magnetic mine taught us that no single invention decides a war. Victory depends on organized effort, industrial application, and refusing to let fear dictate action. The Germans, without intending to, gave us a gift, proof that cooperation can overcome any obstacle." The story that began on the mudflats of Shoeburyness in November 1939 ultimately exposed the deeper truths of modern conflict. Scientific ingenuity alone could not secure victory. Industrial strength mattered more than individual brilliance, and cooperation proved more powerful than secrecy. The magnetic mine meant to starve Britain into surrender, instead nourished Allied confidence. The weapon designed to prove German dominance ended up showcasing Allied adaptability. In the end, the tale of German magnetic mines and Allied degaussing became one of illusions shattered and realities exposed. Germany assumed its secret would remain undiscovered, its advantage permanent, and its enemies powerless. What it discovered was that secrets can be deciphered, advantages erased, and opponents far more capable than imagined. The transformation from terror to triviality took less than a year. The weapon that had paralyzed British shipping in November 1939 was regarded as a routine danger by the following November. The magnetic mine's defeat was absolute, enduring, and irreversible. It stands as a lasting reminder that in modern warfare there are no eternal secrets, no unassailable advantages, and no weapon that cannot be overcome by persistence, cooperation, and industrial strength.